They're off. In the Breeders' Cup Classic, and Bayern broke to the inside. May have impeded shared belief there. Bayern is going to go out to the early lead. 1 furlong to run. Bayern, first of New York. California Chrome on the outside. The three of them come to the wire. Bayern, first of New York. California Chrome. Here's the finish. Bayern, first of New York. Then California Chrome. Shared belief was fourth.
Breeders' Cup 2014 gave us 2 incredible days of racing at Santa Anita, all culminating in the Breeders' Cup Classic. A little controversial, very exciting. I'm sitting with the guys here, Todd, Caleb, and Rich, and we are going to discuss that and much, much more. Todd, I'm going to start with you. What did you make of Bayern winning the Breeders' Cup Classic?
Well, you could say that the Breeders' Cup Classic is supposed to be the exclamation mark to those 2 days of racing, but in this case, let's go to a different punctuation mark. How about a question mark because of the controversy that happened there? But there could be no doubt about one thing, and that is the top 6 spots in the Breeders' Cup Classic were 3-year-olds. So one thing we can definitely take out of it, the 3-year-olds were a dominant group this year.
And I also think you got to give some credit to Martin Garcia. I know there was a slamming at the gate early on, but Martin really has done such a great job for Bob Baffert. And you think of Bayern, you think back to looking at Lucky. I mean, I give Martin a lot of credit for backing down that second half and really controlling the pace to be able to take Bayern wire to wire. Yes, he did slam sheer belief out of the gate. Stewards didn't make the change, but I thought it was still a pretty nice ride throughout there from Martin Garcia.
I think a lot of folks left that race unsatisfied. And the stewards, look, to their credit, there's always going to be an element of subjectivity involved in these things. It's a flesh and blood game, but when they finally quoted us the rule that they are charged with enforcing, that language, I'm sorry, is so squishy. It's exactly what we don't want. We don't want people trying to assess in the first 100 yards of a race what is going to happen at the end of a mile and a quarter. It left a lot of questions.
Well, and you know what, that's going to change things because they're looking at the rule in California. So that Breeders' Cup Classic could be a watershed moment.
I have to ask, do you guys think that they should change the rule because of all the controversy that happened after that race?
Well, we talked about punctuation marks. How about syntax? Just make it clear for us. I do think the stewards need better guidelines. I personally would like to see a total overhaul of the steward situation. In other words, I like where there's a replay center. Maybe there's a replay center for the West Coast, the Midwest, and the East Coast, and so it's not on-track stewards making the decisions. Maybe you get more consistency that way.
And it's not as though the stewards don't have plenty to do at their specific racetracks. I mean, they're working from dawn until dusk every single day. I'm all for that, Todd, and I think that a lot of professional sports have already adopted that kind of off-site, offshoring of the decision-making process. Let's do it.
And I think uniformity would probably be one of the key words that, your professional sports leagues, they really have that. Racing the jurisdictions from different state to state, you don't necessarily have that uniformity, which is what can be really frustrating for the fans.
Now, do you guys think, Rich, I'm going to start with you, that whole controversy overshadowed the entire Breeders' Cup, or is there something that sticks out to you aside from that classic race?
Well, yeah, I think there were a number of standout performances. The Breeders' Cup delivers every single year. I think the one that really took me by surprise and just left me with my jaw hanging open was Texas Red. We lost American Pharoah, who was clearly the leading 2-year-old out here, and then the horse that ran second to him in the setup race also scratched. As a bettor, I didn't make my way back to the horse that finished third in the front runner stakes, and Texas Red just put on a show.
Do you think that makes American Pharoah look even better? I mean, I know he's hurt right now, and it's going to take a while for him to get back, but Texas Red winning like that?
It's funny you should say that, because I actually advanced that opinion in the Handicapsule one day. I said, Texas Red's big win maybe just flatters American Pharoah. Immediately, I got the email from Texas Red's owner saying, not so fast. We got something to say about the 3-year-old scene next year.
I'm very excited for that, especially the Kentucky Derby. There's such great talent coming up. But Caleb, what for you? What stood out for the Breeders' Cup 2014?
The one horse that I really loved was Work All Week at the Breeders' Cup Sprint. And when you really think about it, for the Midwest Thoroughbreds, Roger Brueggemann, I actually had a chance to talk with Roger on the phone before, at the lead up to the Breeders' Cup. And I said, when are you going to ship him out? He said, to be honest with you, we're trying to figure that out because we've never been in this position before. And, for Midwest Thoroughbreds to be a blue-collar type establishment, they always lead the country in wins, but at that claiming and starter allowance level, to have a homebred like that who had never been beaten on dirt, especially with Florent Giroux. I know, Todd, he was riding very well at Keeneland. For me, the one moment that sticks out was Work All Week.
And I think that emphasizes the point that a Breeders' Cup winner can come from anywhere. Work All Week's an Illinois bred. And then we also saw a Japanese bred in Kara Kuntai take the Breeders' Cup Mile. It still remains an international event. And that's what I love about the Breeders' Cup. A winner can come from anywhere.
Oh, completely. East Coast, West Coast, internationally. It's such an exciting affair. And, okay, so Santa Anita has had it for the past 3 years, but what's really exciting to me is we're going to see Breeders' Cup at some new venues. First and foremost, which is going to come, I would say, 3 years from now, 2017, which would be Del Mar. Mar. What do you guys make of Del Mar getting it? You know, the surf meets the turf there?
It's overdue. It's overdue for places like Del Mar and Keeneland to have the Breeders' Cup. So this is going to be a fantastic 3-year run for the Breeders' Cup, starting with Keeneland in 2015. Then, as you said, a couple years after that at Del Mar. Say all you want about traffic flow and the rest of it. These facilities deserve a chance to have exposure to the casual racing fan.
You know, when the conversation turns to venues where the Breeders' Cup belongs, Del Mar and Keeneland quickly enter the picture. Now, Keeneland's on a fairly short fuse here. They've got to get ready to go by 2015. Del Mar's got a lot of time to kind of look and see what Keeneland does, because I have to say, for the smaller physical plants, there have been some instances in Breeders' Cup's history where they haven't gotten it quite right. So I'm hopeful that Keeneland and Del Mar do.
And I just want to jump in on that point before you say something, Caleb, and that is, I give such credit to the Keeneland management team. They sent a group of representatives out to the Breeders' Cup in 2014 to observe what's going on at Santa Anita. Keeneland, yes. Are they up against it size-wise and maybe weather-wise? But I guarantee you that management crew will get it right. They'll do the best they can.
Yeah, and another thing, too, about Keeneland, I think that the beauty of the paddock area, I think the fans are really going to see Keeneland and horse racing in its most basic form next year at the Breeders' Cup. Personally, I can't wait for it. There is the question about maybe it being a smaller racetrack and also the surrounding areas of the hotel and the transportation. I get that, but we know that Keeneland's a first-class organization, and they'll figure it out. But what's most important is what's going to happen on the racetrack, and I think that's going to be tremendous.
Do you think we're going to get all sorts of different caliber horses? Are we still going to get the international horses coming in at Keeneland and at Del Mar? You don't think it'll be any different?
Well, take a look at the invitational races they have on their graded stakes calendar in the fall. They get international horses all the time. That is a facility that European horsemen want to run at. And remember, most of those horses started there. They went through the sales pavilion first, so it's a return to Keeneland for them.
And if the European connections are eyeing a Breeders' Cup venue, I think Keeneland is easily as attractive as, and maybe more so than Santa Anita, because out here in Southern California, we've been dealing with the endless summer.
Yeah.
It's very hot in the fall out there in Arcadia. Keeneland fall, you won't have to deal with that. Maybe we get even a stronger European grass contingent.
And another thing to keep in mind about the European grass horses, I had this conversation with the bloodstock agent at Keeneland. For the European trainers and connections the last few years, they know that if the horse likes firm turf, they can ship him to Santa Anita. Whereas Keeneland in the fall, there's a possibility of rain, so they're going to send their best turf horses over, and they just hope and pray that they get the right surface.
Speaking of surfaces, this is very interesting because we've had a synthetic surface for a long time. This is the end of the synthetic era. And speaking of Keeneland, that's getting the Breeders' Cup, is back to dirt. Caleb, what do you make of that?
I think it's bold on Keeneland's part based on the fact that they were on the leading frontier of bringing the synthetic, and then they were kind of the ones that backed off of it and decided to go to dirt. I think personally it's going to make races like the Bluegrass finally a legitimate Kentucky Derby prep. Really, the only thing that Keeneland's not on the top level would be their final Derby prep, which is the Toyota Bluegrass. I think next year that might change.
Well, and they got off to success early. Street Sense didn't win that race early on when they had the synthetic, but he went on to win the Kentucky Derby. But the fact is, Rich, at least somebody's stepping up and saying, okay, maybe this wasn't the best idea. Look, it was done with the best of intentions,
right.
But at some point you got to say what's best for racing.
Yeah, it was Turfway originally, 2005. A lot of tracks followed suit here in California. There was the mandate that came down from the California Horse Racing Board. All the California tracks had to go that direction. And what we learned was that it was just a work in progress. Maybe it was a rush to judgment. The track maintenance had issues. The tracks themselves had some issues down at Del Mar with the poly track. It was one thing during morning training. It was something else in the afternoon. It's no coincidence that Del Mar and Keeneland go back to dirt and they're awarded a Breeders' Cup. I mean, those two things are neatly dovetailed. And let's not exactly ring the death knell for synthetic track racing. You've got Presque Isle Downs, you've got Woodbine, you've got Arlington Park.
Golden
Gate.
Golden Gate's still there. And, you know, and I understand that there are a couple of other tracks that are actually contemplating a move to synthetic. They're eastern tracks where they're always in danger of losing racing days, having turf fields depleted if they come off the grass. So synthetic track racing at some venues is going to stick around for a while yet.
Plenty of changes clearly on the East Coast, but also on the West Coast. We've had a lot of changes with the racetracks, the demise of Betfair Hollywood Park and Fairplex, and then obviously Los Alamitos getting their own thoroughbred meet. Did you think it was a successful 2014 for West Coast racing?
I have to tell you, I was worried about West Coast racing about 3 years ago.
As was my father,
yeah.
10 years ago.
Hey,
really
I can't imagine being a horseman or woman and not knowing what the future held. That would be definitely a precarious situation to be in. But as a fan, I was wondering too, especially with the decline of Hollywood Park, and then along came Los Alamitos to step up and fill the void, and then this Del Mar Fall meet. What a spectacular experience that was. If you didn't get to Del Mar Fall, make sure you make your plans next year. It was a huge success, I think even more so than they expected going in. So I'm more bullish and optimistic about California racing than I've been in years. I think the calendar makes sense now with the venues they have.
Yeah, and I think a lot of fans had their questions about how would the fall meet fare there at Del Mar, but it was a huge success. But for me, being out at the quarters all the time for Los Alamitos, I'm excited to see the daytime action. And Los Alamitos has kind of hit the jackpot this year. I mean, you have Share Belief in the Los Al Derby. You got Take Charge Brandy and the Starlets. So they've really had a lot of fortune.
And California Chrome training there.
Exactly.
Home of California Chrome.
It's been a great year for Los Alamitos, so I'm excited to see it there in the daytime.
I think California has passed the test with flying colors. Look, not only Hollywood Park, and Todd, you and I just flew back from Oklahoma City. I think you were on the wrong side of the plane.
I would have closed my eyes anyway. I don't want to see what they've done.
I mean, it really is sad flying over the husk of what was once Hollywood Park. We also lost Fairplex. I mean, I got a lot of memories wrapped up in that facility.
Oh, going to the fair. I mean, it was great.
With Los Alamitos and Del Mar, as you say, picking up the slack here, I think California racing is absolutely on the uptick.
We could talk about this all day long. So many things to discuss, but I've got to hand it over to Mike, Matt, and Joaquin as they're going to discuss their top 10 connections of 2014.